All right, here we go. Welcome everyone to week 3 of Nishmat's Faith in a World of Turmoil series. We're so glad to see all of you here with us. Thank you for joining. I'm going to introduce Rabbanit Gilla Rosen, who has a BA in English Literature from Columbia University and an MA in Comparative Literature from the University of Manchester. She is a graduate of Nishmat's inaugural class of Yoatzot Halakha and has been answering questions of women's health and halakha for nearly 20 years in this capacity. She is the Dean Emeritus of the Yakar Institute in Jerusalem and a founder of Israel's Forum Takana. And she currently teaches Midrash and Gemara at Yakar and at Nishmat. Rabbanit Gilla is a sought-after speaker worldwide, particularly in England and North America. And tomorrow this class will be posted on Nishmat's YouTube channel. Feel free to share with your friends. Without further ado, Rabbanit Gilla.
So first of all, hello to everyone, and I very much hope that you and your families and your friends are well, and that if anybody is ill, they're doing well, and that you can have the pleasure of learning in happiness and closeness. We find ourselves in unsettling, or maybe shall we say rattling times, and Nishmat asked that we relate to this issue of faith in a world of turmoil, and I want to come at it from the point of view of relationship. I think what's happened in the last few months has has questioned certain 20th century assumptions about human knowledge, about human understanding, about human control, and that's really thrown us. And that's problematic, but we can also use it for the good. I don't for a moment in this hour suggest that I understand anything. I want to suggest things we can do with the situation. Yes, ways we can make use of what we're experiencing, not explaining the experience, but taking it forward. At the moment, we have to spread ourselves physically, spread ourselves thin, in something that's interesting enough we call social distancing, whereas it really doesn't have to be social distancing, it has to be physical distancing. And at the same time that we're creating this social distancing for safety, we've become more and more aware of the interrelatedness of all human beings. Something that starts in one place on the globe is suddenly all over the place. And also of the equal fragility of ourselves as human beings. In other words, our similarity. So on the one hand, we're putting a lot of effort just before this time together. I went for a little walk in the park, and every time I saw somebody, what did I do? I moved a little away and made sure my mask was on, which is the opposite of my normal impulse, certainly as both an American and living in Israel. That's the opposite of the usual impulse. So on the one hand, we're pulling away, and on the other hand, we're so aware of the interrelatedness. On a personal level also, many of us have been thrown into a situation where either we're living temporarily with far more people than we used to, like some of our children with their children who weren't in school, or we're living with far fewer people than we used to because we're not getting out. So we suddenly have a situation where some of us have far less time than we ever had, and others of us have suddenly far more time and more choice of what are we going to do with our time. So we've been our spatial sense has been thrown out of kilter, our sense of time, our rhythms have been thrown out of kilter, and our assumptions about ourselves as a species have certainly been thrown out of kilter. And to think about this together, I chose a couple of verses, one that's sort of connected still with Pesach and one that's connected with Shavuot, maybe because that's just where I am at the moment, where we are at the moment. That's a place where we are, where we remain. We're still counting the Omer, even if everything else is going all over the place. And so I chose one verse from closer to Pesach and one from closer to Shavuot, and the Midrash around it. Now, just to get together on this, Midrash is a form of literature. It's a form of exegesis. It's always a study of a verse or a study of a relationship of a number of verses. There are Midrashim found, for instance, in the Gemara, but there also are collections of Midrash, and we're going to be using two today, both of which are about the book of Exodus. One's called Mechilta, that's an early collection, And the people quoted in it are all Tanaim, like Rabbi Akiva or Hillel. Those are the sort of people that quoted in it. And one is called Shmot Rabbah, which is a later collection. So we're going to be using some material from both and a little bit of Mishnah. And for the first time today, I successfully managed to get at least some of the English off of Sefaria. One of my computers refuses to work with Sefaria, but the other ones seem to agree for a short time at least. So at least some of it we'll have with English. And please, I'm used to living in Israel, and therefore I forget to translate. If you didn't understand something, that's worth an immediately unmute and telling me, because probably lots of other people didn't, or at least a wave so that I can see. But if we've got the share screen up, I might not see you wave because I won't see everybody. So I'd like to start with a verse that seems innocuous enough. So those of you who've got a Chumash or a Sefaria available, if you would turn to Shmot Yudalet, Shmot chapter 14. In Shmot chapter 14, the Jews have just gotten out of Egypt, and they see the Egyptians coming after them, and they're petrified, very understandably. Their worlds have suddenly changed. They were used to being slaves. They're now being pursued by the people who used to be their masters. Terribly frightening. And not only that, but where they get to the sea, so there's nowhere they can go. And they cry out to God, and they complain to Moses. And after it says that they cry out to God, and Moses replies, don't worry, we suddenly have the verse, Vayoma Hashem el Moshe, God says to Moses, Ma titzak elai. I don't know literally what Ma titzak elai means. Literally it means, what? You calling out or you crying out to me. Ma titzak elai might mean, why are you crying out to me? Or why are you crying out to me? Or why are you crying out to me? Yes? What are you doing crying out to me? Maybe the closest would be, what are you doing crying out to me? So tell the Jewish people and let them go forward, and you raise your staff and over the sea and break it in two, and the Jewish people will go through the sea. Right? So here the Jewish people, just before the sea, they cry out to God. They complain to Moses. It doesn't say that Moses cried out. It says that he tells them not to worry. And the next thing, God says to Moses, Ma titzak elai. 3 words, Ma titzak elai. Now, there are 2 big questions. The first question is, why did God say that to Moses if Moses didn't cry out? It doesn't say that Moses cried out. It says the Jewish people cried out. So we have lots of possible answers. Maybe Moses also cried out. He thought, I'll pray too. Maybe it symbolizes the whole Jewish people. The Midrash assumes that Moses also cried out, and that God is telling Moses, what are you doing crying out to me? Now, the rabbis are not too disturbed about the problem that it didn't say that he was crying out before. That doesn't bother them. Okay, so it doesn't say he was crying out. What the rabbis can't cope with is that in a time of turmoil, in a time of desperation, God says to a human being, Ma titzak elai. What are you doing crying out to me? Right? Because what else should that human being be doing? And the answer that God says is he should raise his staff and cut the waters in two, and the Jewish people will go through. Well, that's a very lovely idea, but it's no way Moses could know that that was what he was supposed to do, right? I mean, if God had said to him, why are you crying out to me? Can't you see the road on the left is open? I could sort of understand. But that's not what God says. He says, what are you doing crying out to me? Just lift your arm and break the sea. Now, the Midrash is completely taken with this verse, with these 3 words, non-stop, such that the Mechilta, which is terse, has something like 35 suggestions as to how the Almighty could say to a human being, Ma titzak elai. In other words, they move it out of the original context and they say, we have to understand, if the Torah records that God says to a human being, Ma titzak elai, how can that be? And the Midrash comes up with a lot of answers. It comes up with an answer like, you didn't have to cry out. You could have just asked, because you should have known that I'm close to you. It comes out with Moses, you didn't need to cry out. You should have known I'm close to you. It comes up with, After all, for the sake of Adam, I made the dry land. Of course, I was going to do it for you. Or Abraham cut the same word is used. He cut the logs. Of course, for Abram, I was going to save you. You didn't need to cry out. You could have asked me. Okay, that's one set of types of answers. And those they come up with a lot of different answers. I want to focus on one particular type of answer that they come up with. And here I want to ask you, Julie, if you could put it up on share screen, the source page. Could you do that for me? Okay, you want to get the whole, right, brilliant. This is lovely, okay, because it actually isn't so large as when I do it. Julie, you are a miracle worker. How did you do that? No, but it's only part of the page, that's why. There's a piece that's missing. Can you see on the left here? Julie, you need to unmute yourself. Okay?
Sorry, someone put on music in my house, so I muted quickly.
Oh, I see. But can you see that we're missing, you can see the word relationships, the beginning of the word. No,
Yeah.
Not that way. The other way you need to go.
One second.
Okay. That's it. You got it. Perfect. Now, if you can move the whole thing over to the left, that would be amazing, but I'm not sure you can. So leave it as it is.
To the left of the screen?
Yeah. Is that possible? If not, don't worry. Okay, I forgot that. Okay. Now, can you scroll up, please, to source number 3?
Okay.
Okay. All right. Source number 3. In source number 3, God says to Moses, you didn't need to cry out to me because the Jewish people were already crying to me. And when God listens to people, he doesn't need any particular person. In fact, maybe we'll start not with number 3, but with number 2, just right at the top of where Julie scrolled. Shomea tefillah. And I'm sorry, these I don't have in English, but soon I'll have it all with English as well. You find a basar vadam. Basar vadam is the word for a human being, but what does it literally mean? Blood and flesh and blood. It's a very physical way of talking about a human being. Basar vadam eino yachol lishma sichat shnayim ke'achad. He can't hear 2 people talking at the same time. Aval HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but God, ain't okay, he's not so. Ela hakol mitpalelin lefanav v'hu shomea u'mekabel tfilatan. Everybody that prays before him, and he hears their tefillah. If you look now at 3, Julie, can you just show where number 3 is? Just put that's it. You put number 3, slightly different version than earlier in the Mechilta. Afilu kol ba'ei olam. Even if all the human beings at one time would come, ba'in v'tzoakim lefanav, would come and cry out before him, hu shomea tzedakam. He hears their cry. Why? There's a verse, shomea tefillah, adecha kol basar yavo. You are the one who hears prayer, adecha, to you, kol basar yavo, every flesh will come. And the word adecha is not the usual word. What word would we expect? Something like elecha or lecha, to you. Adecha comes from the word ad. Right up to you, every human being can come. Right up to you, every human being can approach. Shomea tefillah adecha, right up to you, kol basar yavo. In other words, God is saying to Moses, you don't need to pray at the moment. Why? Because God hears everyone. Let's go back to source 2, the second part of source 2. Davar acher shomea tefillah. Julie, can you just show there? Amar Rabbi Yehuda bar Shalom. Here, a little down. That's it. A little further down, Julie. But why don't you just the second paragraph? That's it. If you could highlight that paragraph. Imba basar v'dam, a human being. Imba ani lomar davar lefanav eino shomea hemenu. Human beings. If somebody without much social standing, a poor person comes to say something, he doesn't pay as much attention. Comes somebody with big social standing. Shomea makablo, he pays a lot of attention. He accepts him. He's willing. He's welcoming. HaKadosh Baruch Hu eino kain, God is not like that. Hakol shavin lefanav. Everyone is equal before him. And since this text was written by men, Hanashim v'ha'avadim, ha'aniyim v'ashirim, women, slaves, that is not only us, all of them out there, the poor and the rich, they are all equal before God. Tedalacha, you should know that, because when Moses started to pray, about Moses it says, Tfilah Moshe ish Elokim, and about the need also says the words Tfilah. And when Moses started to pray, what did God say to him? Ma titzak elai, what are you doing praying? They've already prayed. Why, Moses, do you think? If you see everybody's praying, you don't need it. You don't need to add your prayer. They've already prayed. Now let's go down to source 4. Judy, can you bring us down? Pull it, scroll up a little, bring us down to, just scroll up a bit. That's it. Great. Okay, so source 4 is from Shmot Rabbah. That's the later Midrash. The later Midrash tends to spit it out a bit more. Shehu oseh et hakol bevat achat. In English, God spoke all these words, saying it's actually on the later piece on the 10 Commandments, that God does all at once, kills and gives life at once, harms and heals at once. God hears the prayers of a woman on the birthing stool, sailors and desert workers, walkers, and those bound in jail. One in the east, one in the west, one in the north, one in the south. God hears all these at once. And so Isaiah said, Yotzer or ubarei choshech, God forms light and creates darkness. In other words, you get the impression, if you're in trouble and you want to pray, but I don't know, has God got space, has God got time, there's so much else going on. It isn't like that. That's not God. God hears everyone at the same time. There's a woman giving birth, there's a sailor on the sea, there's someone walking through jail, through the desert. Those were the things that were fearful 2,000 years ago, and there's some of them are still pretty fearful today. There's somebody in jail. There's one person in the east and one in the west, one in the north and one in the south. God hears them all. And in another midrash, which I haven't brought, it says it's as if an angel takes all the prayers, locks them together, gathers them together, and makes a crown from God, for God from all these prayers. Because and it's a very beautiful piece because it talks about one group's praying here and one group's praying there and one group's praying here, and they're not all in rhythm at the same time, and one's gotten up to Shacharis and one's in Musaf and one's nearly in Mincha, and somebody in Australia it's Shacharis the next morning, and they're all, but an angel takes all those prayers and winds them together for a crown for God. In other words, and I feel that very much because in Jerusalem now, because we're not allowed to pray outdoors instead of indoors, as you walk the streets, you can hear one Lachadodi after the next Lachadodi, and you can hear Kaddish time and again and again. And matter of fact, yesterday, there was a minyan so close that I was in my kitchen when I heard Kedusha. So that sense of all these different prayers going up to God is, I feel very much at the moment. I suppose that's part of city life. If it's reasonably dense, then the things just seem to intertwine with each other. So, Julie, why don't you take the sources off for a moment, for a few minutes, so we can just process these together. So, what these sources are suggesting is that our experiences are brought together through our relationship with God. I don't want to, try to get mystical and say within God, because I wouldn't know what that meant. But I want to suggest that it's God who is processing and bringing our experiences together. When different people pray here, there, and everywhere, it's God who brings those prayers together. And it's when people are in trouble in different ways, in different places, and maybe another person isn't in trouble, they're standing there thanking God. Those different experiences are brought together by God, by the people turning to God and God bringing those experiences together. And I thought that was really a very, very interesting idea. And the rabbis who are talking about these ideas, the rabbis who are composing Midrash, are living through some of them, or almost all of them, very troubled times. They're living through the Roman period, the destruction of the temple, the period after that when they can't go back to Jerusalem. They're living through upheaval after upheaval. And in those upheavals, they're talking about a sense of continuity between each other, and sometimes more between each other as Jewish people, and sometimes between all human beings. Both exist through a sense of relationship with God. And I think that's a very, very interesting way of reimagining our space now, when we're physically trying to stay separate, very physically separate, but to be aware that our shared experience that we're bringing to God is actually, in that bringing it to God, is a sharing of that experience between each other. Now, we can share it without the bringing to God, but the bringing to God is an added dimension that helps pull it together, which is something that I think they were feeling at that moment because they were living in very difficult, very troubled times. And here, I want to think about the next verse. Now, for the next one, we don't need right away to go to the source sheet. What we do need to do is move to chapter 20 of Exodus. So that's just another page or two. And also, I tried to find a nice old-fashioned picture of the Ten Commandments on two tablets, and I couldn't find anything that I could easily add in. So we'll all use our imaginations, but we all know what we're talking about. I want you to think of the Ten Commandments. How do the Ten Commandments usually look? And how do we imagine they looked? We really don't know what they looked like, but we all are sure we know what they look like. What do they look like? Like they look like over the Aron Kodesh, the Ark and Shul, right? 2 tablets of stone. Each one has got 5 commandments on it, right? And the top is rounded. Yes, we all know what the 10 commandments look like. Of course, we have no idea, but that's what we're sure. That's in our mind what the 10 commandments look like. And we have hundreds of beautiful pieces of artwork. I was tempted to put a Rembrandt on, with beautiful pieces of artwork with the 10 commandments, but that's how we imagine the 10 commandments, where we actually don't know. The Midrash suggests maybe there were 5 and 5, maybe there were 10 written on each one of the 2 tablets. Lots of suggestions, but the most common tradition is they were 5 and 5. Now, the minute you've got 5 and 5, then you're thinking about a kind of way of structuring the 10 commandments, a way of thinking about the 10 commandments. Now, the 10 commandments come into the world at this moment, which we will celebrate in 2 weeks' time. And in one sense, they're actually not 10. They're about 12, 13 different mitzvot. In Hebrew, it's not 10 commandments, it's 10 dibrot, 10 utterances. In other words, 10 messages from God. But some of them have a few mitzvot in them. It's a little bit of a different feel to say 10 messages than to say 10 commandments. But we're used to 10 commandments, so I'll use the expression, though it's not exact. Now, these 10 commandments, you can look at them as 10 separate ideas, and commandments, or you can look at them as having a shape. What kind of shape does this piece of work have? Like when you think of music, yes? You think of the parts of a symphony or a whole symphony. You think of a sonnet and the way the last 2 lines of a sonnet reflect back on the rest of it. Think of a poem, think of a shape of a poem, of a piece of music, of a piece of art. I think you need to think of the 10 commandments that way. Certainly the Midrash did. Now, when the Midrash did that, then the first thing they came up with, that kind of obvious to all of us, is that when we think of the 10 commandments, let's take a look at them. If we think of the first 5 versus the latter 5, what do we have to say about the first 4, at least for sure, versus the last 5? Well, the first thing we have to say, actually, is there's much more language in the first 5 than there is in the second 5. And that's actually very interesting. In other words, when God gets to Lo Tirzach, do not murder, he doesn't want to talk about it. He'll do that in Parshat Mishpatim. Maybe, what about this situation? No, first just get the clarity. Don't murder, don't commit adultery, don't steal or kidnap. Then we'll get to the details when they're extenuating. So we'll get to that, but strong clarity. A little bit of Beethoven's da-da-da-dum in those 3 in the middle. But besides the fact that the first are very much longer, it's clear that the first 4 for sure are about what the rabbis called Bein Adam Lamakom, between the human being and God, or literally the place, that one who is everywhere, the omnipresent, right? So there's the basis of our relationship. belief, awareness of God. It doesn't say you have to believe. It says, Anochi Hashem Elokecha, I'm here, right? That's what it says. It's not worded as a commandment. It's a dibra. Anochi Hashem Elokecha asher tziticha me'eretz Mitzrayim mibeit avadim, chapter 20, verse 2. I am here. I took you out of Egypt. Is that about believing in God, understanding something about God, being aware of God, whatever, behaving as if you think there's a God in the world? Anochi Hashem Elokecha, I am God who took you out of Egypt. To being really addressed to the Jewish people coming out of Egypt, to us. And much of the world took upon itself to feel addressed by the Ten Commandments. And in Jewish tradition, that should be so, because the Ten Commandments are very similar to the 7 Noahide commandments that the tradition says Noah was commanded. So the fact that the world took upon itself to be connected to the Ten Commandments, or a great part of the world, is, from the point of view of Jewish tradition, what should have happened. Now, we have a side which is about, I would call them mitzvot of faith, being aware of God, not having an idol, which doesn't only mean an object. Lo yeh lecha Elohim acherim, don't have. Never mind afterwards about how you make it. Shabbat, which is a testimony that God created the world. Not taking God's name in vain. Respecting parents, which is still on that side, as part of a relationship, still with in a relationship with God. And then we have the second half, or you could even take the fifth and connect it to the second half, which is what I would call to murder, not to steal, not to be a false witness. Should we call them ethical or societal mitzvahs, right? That create a society, that create our own personal ethics, and that create a society that can function. And the choice is very interesting. We're just used to having them, so we don't think about it. But not to have false witness as one of the 10 commandments is very, very interesting, especially since it's opposite Shabbat. Now, the last one is lo tachmod, not to covet, which goes back inside. We'll get to that. But now the rabbis had another idea. They said in the Midrash, let's not just read these as 2 tablets. So far I was saying we have a tradition, they were on 2 separate tablets, and we read them on 2 separate tablets. And the content of the 2 separate tablets is quite different. But the rabbi said, well, wait a minute, don't read them only as 2 tablets. We want you to read them horizontally as well. Okay, so now let's get back to the source sheet and let's take a look. If you take the second page of the source sheet, Julie, and just put it up there. So mine moved to the top and then moved over. I don't know why. Let's see if we can move. Okay. Mine doesn't want to move at all. Okay, never mind. All right. Right. Source number 5, the top of this page. Anochi Hashem Elokecha asher tziticha me'eretz Mitzrayim mibeit avadim. I am the Lord your God who took you out of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. Slaves. What is opposite that? If we take the 2 and we put them opposite each other, then opposite it is lo tirtzach, do not murder. So in the Mechilta, which is this very early Midrashic collection, they said, Keitzad nitnu aseret hadibrot. Julie, can I trouble you to just follow as I read? Keitzad nitnu aseret hadibrot. Hey aluach zeh, v'hei aluach zeh. Right? And in the English, just you can follow in English as well. How were the 10 commandments given? 5 on one tablet and 5 on the other. Right? Back up to the Hebrew, Ktiv, Anochi Hashem Elokecha. It says, Anochi Hashem Elokecha, Ukenegdo, and opposite it, Lo Tirtzach, you shall not kill. Okay? Why? Did the Torah purposely situate it that way, rather than, let's say, having respect for your parents at the top of the second one? Why is do not murder opposite Anochi Hashem Elokecha, I am God who took you out of Egypt? Why are they opposite each other? Now here, what the Midrash is going to do is it's going to say one column is going to inform the other and vice versa. You can't read one column without the other column. Scripture apprises us, Magid HaKatuv, that spilling blood is tantamount to diminishing the likeness of the king. If you spill blood, ma'aleh alav hakatuv, Julie, help me in the, pointedly it's in the Hebrew, right? Can you do that for me? That's it. Ma'aleh alav katuv, ki'ilu mema'et b'dmut hamelech. If you murder, if you spill blood, they didn't use the word murder, they used even a gentler phrase. If you spill blood, or maybe a stronger phrase that takes us back to Bereshit, to the book of Genesis as well. If you spill blood, the scripture tells you that's as if you are diminishing the likeness of the king. And here it brings a mashal, okay, an analogy. A king of flesh and blood comes into a kingdom and he puts up all sorts of statues and images of himself, okay? Judy, if you follow with the Hebrew, and everybody can follow in the English as well. So you help me follow in the Hebrew. That's it. If you could highlight the next line. That's it. Okay, now, he puts up images, he puts up statues, and he has his likeness carved on the coins. Now, this is not just something from the world of 2,000 years ago, right? I think in the United States, actually, at this moment, there's a lot of discussion going on about statues of heroes in the South who are now anathema to many people. Yes, is that correct? That's what I read, that in the United States now there are questions about statues that are up. Not everybody's statue is what everybody else likes. And in Russia, for instance, there were periods where they went and knocked down a statue of Lenin or a statue of Stalin. In other words, putting up statues and that being meaning something is actually a phenomenon we are aware of today. And we're used to that. Certainly famous faces are on our coins and on our bills, and it's meaningful. And it's a big issue when they, for instance, started to say, well, what about some women's faces on the bills? Yes, these matter. These things matter on the stamps, on the bills. So this king came in and he put up all sorts of statues, and he had his face, had new coins minted. And lachar zman, after a while, what happened? They upset his statues. Wow. They knocked over his statues, literally. They broke his images and they devalued his coins, right? They put them out of circulation. We don't use those coins anymore. What does that mean? What kind of is that saying? Mi'atu b'dmutu shel melech. They diminished the likeness of the king on purpose, right? For after a while, they said, we don't want this king anymore. And I think this is something we're very aware of. With all that, we're so sure that we're not in a world of statues anymore. Suddenly, we discover we are. And it matters. It matters what's on our coins. It matters what statues are up in our squares. And people are knocking down. They're defacing and knocking down statues. That's the mashal. That they're statues and they're getting defaced. And it's a mashal we know. Kach, just so. Call Misha who shof. Now, wait a minute, if we get to that was the mashal, the parable. What's the nimshal? Now here, really, I wish that I could see all your faces and I could get some of you to answer and throw it out. The whole point is, where's the nimshal? What are the statues and what are the coins? And here's the midrash's jump, which maybe some of you knew because we grew up with it, which is, what are the statues? What are the coins? It's us. Human beings are those who are created b'tselem Elokim, right? Human beings are created in God's image. If you hurt a human being, you are damaging the expression of God in the world. God is expressed in the world through the human beings being here. And so if you spill blood, you're diminishing the likeness, as if to say, you're diminishing the expression of God in the world, the sense of God in the world. If a human being can be killed and a human being has God's image, then what does it mean about God? It makes people feel God isn't protecting them. The fact that people can go out and do things. Now, of course, we don't want to leave it there because you don't read the lo titzach, lo tinaf, just as prohibitions. They aren't only mitzvot, they are utterances, and they have to be read in their other side of the coin. They have to remain on the other side, which is other mitzvot, like lo ta'amod al dam re'echa. Don't stand by on your brother's blood. If somebody's being hurt, if somebody's being killed, if somebody's being hurt, don't just stand there. If somebody's being impoverished, you may not stand there, you must go and do something. And it actually exists in the Chumash both as a prohibition to stand by and not try to help, or not try to get somebody else to help, and according to the Ramban, as an active principle, but certainly as a prohibition to stand by and not either help yourself or get help for another human being. And so if somebody saves a human being, they are doing the opposite. They are helping for the experience of God to be greater in the world, for people to experience a sense of God. And I think we all sense that when people are out there risking their lives, for instance, now in the medical world. And it's not just doctors, it's doctors, nurses, cleaners, you name it, people who move the trolleys. People are out there risking their lives. And there is greater sense of the image of God, because that is the expression of the image of God in themselves, saving another image of God. So the Midrash here is saying, don't read. Yes, there are two tablets. And yes, our tradition is that the two tablets, one had mostly your faith mitzvot on one side, and one had mostly your ethical world and the way you create society. But don't read them separately. You have to read them all the time horizontally. And they go on and say, idolatry is similar to adultery, and you name it. They go, and you don't have to go exactly horizontally. You can say, taking God's name in vain is saying, God, I don't care about truth in relation to God. And the way that plays out in human society is when people go and are willing to be false witnesses. Or you could say, as the Midrash, you're a false witness if you don't keep Shabbat, and if you're a false witness if you go to court. But you can do a lot of things. The main thing you need to do is, on the one hand, perceive them as two separate tablets, and on the other, perceive them as one. And as soon as you do that, you're again coming to this question of relationships, that your relationship with God doesn't let you off the hook for a minute, that your relationship with God, with all the gentleness that God says, we don't have an hour, is just not long enough to look at some of the other midrashim on Matitzakalai, but some of them are so gentle. And God says to Moses, Moses, you don't need to cry out. I'm close to you. I'm there for you. With all these senses of closeness to God, they can bring us closer to other human beings with our frailty, because there's an aspect of God in all of us. And with this, I want to bring the next piece. Thank you, Julie, for scrolling upward. Now, this is a Mishnah which comes from the tractate of Sanhedrin. Now, Sanhedrin is about the Sanhedrin, but it's also about courts in general, and it's about court cases. And Julie, what you can do if you want is make it a little larger. I think people would appreciate it. Do you want to? That's it. I wouldn't go to 200%. No. Just maybe 125 will be enough. Just bring it up to 125. What happened? No, it didn't happen. Okay, never mind. Doesn't matter. Okay. Okay, that's where we are. Thank you, Julie. We're on this piece. You want to bring it up to 12? Okay. But you need to scroll down a bit. So we have both. Okay. Why was the human being, this is a piece. So this is a piece in Sanhedrin. And we now have people who are going to testify against someone in a capital case. And we want to say to them, listen, folks, you want to, now, the rabbis made it pretty much impossible ever to convict somebody and give them the death penalty, because you had to have, unlike in American law, you had to have two witnesses who saw you do it and who saw you when you were about to do it and who said to you, this is a terrible thing you're about to do. You mustn't do that. And then they said to you, and if you would do it, it's a capital crime. And you said to them, no, never mind, I'm doing it anyway. Well, if you manage to do that, then they'll get you off the hook because they'll say you were insane. So it was pretty much impossible to actually have capital punishment. It almost never happened. But nevertheless, this is what happened in the court. If there was a capital case, which, as I say, They didn't manage to actually execute during most of the period that we know about. But nevertheless, this is what they wanted you to think about. They would say to the people who wanted to testify, Lefichach nivra adam yichidi. Therefore, human being, English is not, a little imperfect here. The human being was created alone, singly. Here it says, but a single person was created. No. Lefichach nivra adam yichidi. The first human being was created by himself, singly. L'lamedcha, to teach you. Shekol ha'ma'abed nefesh achad. Now, there are different versions of the Mishnah. The correct one, it would seem, is without the word Mi Yisrael, but people always feel like they'd like to put it in, so they stuck it in. Never mind. Doesn't matter. That's why I put it in brackets. It could be that they did use the word Mi Yisrael because they were talking about a Jewish court case, but it would seem that the original version is without the word, but you'll see. Anybody who destroys one person, ma'aleh alav katuv, is deemed by scripture ki'ilu ibed olam maleh. It's as if you destroyed a whole world. And if you save, no, mekayem is not to save. It's even stronger. It's establish a single. So if you help a person to be, you might not save him. You might be one of the people save him. Ma'aleh, the scripture holds it as if you saved a whole world. And why else was the human being created as a single individual? For the peace between human beings. So nobody will say to his friend, somebody else, my father's greater than you, I have better yichus than you. Well, in the end of it, we all got the same yichus. And so that the various sectarians wouldn't say there's actually more than one God. Look, this one God made a person like this, and another one made a person like this. And to show the greatness of God. And we're back to coins. And here it's very interesting because, of course, they didn't know yet about DNA. And the idea that one human being could be created, and from him, so many different human beings, was totally fascinating. Well, it's fascinating to us too, even if we know about DNA. If a human being creates one and then they make more, they come out exactly the same, but the Almighty, out of Adam and Eve, made every human being unique. So every human being is unique, and we are all from one human being. And so here they talk about these two circles, the circle of us Jews caring in a greater sense for each other and praying together and having a greater shared mitzvot, and a broader community of people who are all B'Tselem Elokim. As Rabbi Akiva said, Chaviv Adam, beloved is the human being, for God created them in a B'Tselem Elokim, with the image of God. Okay, Julie, you can take the sources off so we can see each other, because what's the point of talking about a sense of closeness and we can't see each other? Where do we go with this at this time? And I think where we go at this time is with a sense of religion as giving us a chance to think about how we can use this time. And again, not to answer the questions. I think one of the problems with Judaism is that it doesn't necessarily answer questions. In fact, sometimes it makes the questions bigger because they're more. If you haven't gotten a God who is omnipotent and who is kind and good, then you haven't got so many questions. You just maybe you're disgruntled, but you don't have a big theological question. You have a big theological question because God is omnipotent and omniscient and kind and just. That's what makes us the problem. So I don't think I could even dare to try to think about faith in the time of turmoil as something that I know anything about. But what I can think about is, how does religion, how does this faith, how does this relationship with God that God is calling me to, and I know that he's calling every human being to, how does that help me to use this time to develop certain things that maybe I had developed less before? Dafka, particularly in this time when I'm watching out and moving back when I see another human being in the physical real, and actually to be more aware of what I share with that human being as I walk down the street. And I'm trying to actually create this, what we're calling social distancing, but doesn't have to be in a deep sense social distancing. It has to be physical distancing, but there a chance to say, what does this help me to create? What bonds does this help me to create? And I know, for instance, one of the things that it did in Yerushalayim is because people couldn't get to their regular shuls, but they were davening in the open air on their street, everybody had to daven with whoever they happened to live close to. And this was a new experience because, oh, wait a minute, he's got this nusach and he's got this one and this one does it this way and he's Sfardi and he's Temani and he's Ashkenazi and he's nusach Sfard, and what are we going to do? And he has this dirge for Hallel and he has this happy Hallel, and the creativity that went into people trying to find ways and people sharing where they'd gotten Sefer Torah from. This one had gone back to Syria to get a Sefer Torah, and this one had saved a Sefer Torah from Eastern Europe, and the stories of where these Sefer Torah had come from. And the sense that there was a sense that one could use this open airness of prayer. Again, I live in Katma, which is relatively densely populated with people who were willing to get out there. And then again, also, how do you do this without disturbing the neighbors who may not want it? Be disturbed too early in the morning, for instance. Yes, so how do you create minyanim that at the same time, we're now discussing Shavuot. When you think Shavuot, do we have an open air minyan at 4 o'clock in the morning if there are apartment buildings right near the shul? Well, no, was that what God wants? People singing at the top of their voices and waking up babies in the next apartment building? I doubt it. So this whole idea that we've been forced in our prayers as well to become more aware of others are down the street in the process of prayer. And been told you're going to have to figure different spatial arrangements out. You're going to have to figure how you're going to choose to do this and how you're going to think about others in different kinds of ways. So it's happening within the Jewish community in its own way. And it's happening in the world at large because there's no way we can pretend that human beings do not affect each other. And what happens in one place doesn't affect the other place. And that protecting one area won't help to protect another. We can't pretend those things anymore. And we can't just be globally for the sake of economics. We have to think globally in other kinds of ways as well. And how good is the health system? And should it be a health system that easily caters to everyone so that when there's an emergency, it will cater to everyone? Yes. How the situation is creating the fact that God says to us, I pull together your prayers and yourselves by each one of you having an image of myself in you. The fact that that is what God tells us gives us the possibility to use what's going on now in a way that pulls us together rather than pushing us apart. And that's, I think, what we could take away, what for me faith can do in this time of turmoil. First of all, if there's a steadiness of it, like Sfirat Omer, counting the Omer, it's happening no matter what. We're sitting and counting it. But then when we think about Shavuot, we have to think in new ways about Shavuot, because we have to think of ways that create community without hurting anybody along the way. And in that process, we have to think about interrelatedness. So I thought that Chazal, coming from 2,000 years ago, but from times of turmoil, had a lot to tell us about this moment in our own lives. And especially this moment when we were aware that there's so much we didn't understand, that we thought we knew, and that we need to go back to say to our relationship with God to help us understand. So it's been a pleasure for me, the familiar faces and the ones that are new, to try to connect to you. And I think at this time it's especially important. And we've got maybe 5-10 minutes, Julie, if it's possible, maybe to open it for people's comments and questions. Doesn't have to be it can be a question on something that we're looking at, if you have, or a comment on something we're looking at, or a comment about your own experience in relation to this. I suggest you put your hand near your face and unmute yourself and just be bold and start talking. Is there anybody who would like to say something? Well, there's a child there who wants to say something. Yes.
Gilla, it's Ida. Ida, I wanted to comment about this feeling about the balcony minyanim. And the sort of, I don't live in a community that's quite as dense as yours, or that's quite as, let's just say, frum. Like everybody is not on their balconies, but there are a few. And as I've been watching, especially Shabbos morning or a Chag morning, and a particular fellow next door in a next door building with his little 3-year-old comes out. There's a group of guys across the road. There's a whole group of them. So they have a whole minyan and we can hear them. It's very special. This feeling of davening together with people you absolutely don't know, right?
Absolutely.
But then there's a connection there. And I've found it to be, I always love davening at Yakar with people around me and songs that, tunes that I knew. But this also is very special. It's a whole new feeling, and it's a whole new way of connecting with my people. And I found that to be something really beneficial and special in this period.
Absolutely. And what interests me is how we're going to take that forward.
Yeah.
The first week that they couldn't daven in a minyan, and people were very upset. And one of my sons in Tel Aviv, where they have a Yakar minyan there, said to people, listen, there's this ideas in Medrash that the Satan is in there in the base Medrash. There's a lot of things that intentions that go on in minyanim. And this is a time to free ourselves from that kind of arguments of little groups and cliques and open up. So there's a lot we can take from it, and hopefully we will take from it, and maybe a greater hospitality to others who are different.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll be able to take that with us. I think we can sit here and close down, or we can use this time to open up in kinds of new ways. Again, I still feel that the greatest things are the equivalent of the midwives at the beginning of the book of Exodus. The people are out there saving people, and all of us, in any way we can help towards that, we should be doing that. And very often, again, those are people we weren't close to before, right? In Israel, that's the case. A lot of the people helping are people that people don't know at all, and their faces were not out there. And I'm sure it's the same in the United States. A lot of the people who are out there helping are people that we don't know socially. And we should be thinking about our relationships with them at this time. I thank you, Ida. Somebody else would like to say something? Let's see if there's anybody else.
Happy.
Yes.
I'm happy. I'm living from Toronto, and I wouldn't have this opportunity if there were these Zoom classes. I'm absolutely thrilled to be learning. Thank you, Gilla.
I think one of the things that's happening is that some of us are saying we're going to continue a Zoom option when we teach, because some of us are enjoying so much being able to connect with people and saying, wait a minute, this isn't so difficult that we can have a Zoom option when people can join in, mostly in the room, hopefully again together and with Zoom option. So I hope so. So I wish all of you well, and I hope that all of your families will be well, your friends will be well, and that you will all be able to celebrate the Shavuot with a great sense of the gift of the time and the happiness, and it won't be marred by, God forbid, and you'll be able to have a sense of great happiness then. I wish you all well.
Amen.
Amen.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbanit Gilla. I just want to tell everyone that we will be back next week at the same time with Yoetzet Halacha Ilana Haddad on the Book of Yehezkel, Lessons for Today. We'll see you then, and you can find this shiur on Nishmat's YouTube channel tomorrow. Take care.